It was 7:30 p.m. on a rainy Thursday in Ohio when my son slammed the door and left me standing in the hallway, staring at the brass knob as if it had just sealed my fate. The echo of that door, it wasn't just wood against a frame. No, it was the sound of something breaking deep inside me. The sound of a bond, stretched thin for years, finally snapping. The rain outside pounded harder, each drop on the window like a cruel reminder of my tears. My living room was dimly lit, the old lamp beside my rocking chair flickering faintly. Its golden light stretched across the floorboards, revealing dust in the air, swirling slowly, like the ghosts of the past that refused to leave. I remember clutching the edge of the wooden table. My hands trembled, the veins standing out against the pale, wrinkled skin. I whispered to myself, when did it all go wrong? When did my little boy stop seeing me as his mother and start seeing me as a burden? My eyes drifted toward the mantelpiece where family photos lined up, each one a frozen moment of love. One frame held his smile at 5 years old, missing a front tooth, holding a toy train he refused to let go of. Another showed him at his high school graduation, proud and tall, with me by his side, clapping the loudest. I could almost smell that day again, the faint whiff of freshly cut grass on the football field, the sweat of proud fathers in their suits, and the trembling pride in my chest. I remember thinking, he'll never forget me. We'll always be side by side. But that was years ago. That was before money became the center of his world, before he told me that love wasn't enough. That night, after the door slammed, I shuffled slowly into the kitchen. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you hear your own heartbeat. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon. Earlier I had baked an apple pie, his favorite, but he didn't even touch it. The pie sat there, untouched on the counter, steam long gone, a symbol of the warmth I was offering that he no longer wanted. I stared at it for what felt like hours. I had baked pies for him since he was a boy. When he scraped his knee, I made pie. When he won a baseball game, I made pie. When he came home heartbroken after his first breakup, I stayed up half the night just to make sure the crust came out golden brown. Because to me, love was always shown in little things. But tonight, he left without a slice. The argument had been brewing for weeks, maybe months. That night it spilled over. "You need to sell the house, Mum," he had said, his voice sharp, his eyes colder than the storm outside. "Sell my house? The home your father built with his hands? The home where you took your first steps?" I asked, clutching the back of the chair to steady myself. "It's not practical anymore. You don't need this space. You could move in with me, or better yet, into a senior community." A senior community. Like I was some piece of furniture to be relocated, tucked away where I wouldn't be in the way. "I'm not leaving this home," I told him. "This house is more than walls, it's our life. Your father's memory is here. My love is in every corner." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Love doesn't pay bills, Mum. Money does. You need to think realistically." That word, realistically, it stung, as if my love, my years of sacrifice, weren't real. As if I was just some old woman clinging to ghosts. When he walked out that night, the silence he left behind was deafening. I stood there listening to the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Each tick was a reminder that time was moving on, with or without his love. I sank into my rocking chair. The cushions sagged beneath me, molded from years of sitting in the same spot, telling bedtime stories, knitting sweaters, humming lullabies. I rocked slowly, the creak of the chair the only sound in the house. I stared at the fireplace, where the embers glowed faintly, struggling to stay alive, just like the hope in my heart. I thought about all the nights I had stayed awake for him. When he was sick with the flu at 7, I held his hand and pressed a cool cloth against his forehead until dawn. When he came home past curfew at 16, I sat by the window, watching headlights, praying each car was his. Did he forget those nights? Did he forget the mother who gave up her own dreams so he could chase his? Or did he remember and simply not care anymore? My gaze fell on the quilt draped over the rocking chair. It was a patchwork of his childhood clothes. The red square was from his favorite baseball jersey. The soft blue patch was from his baby blanket. The faded green was from the shirt he wore when he caught his first fish with his father. Every stitch was sewn with love, my hands working late into the night while he slept. And yet, he had barely glanced at it when I showed him. That quilt was his story, our story, but to him, it was just fabric. As I sat in that chair, the storm raging outside, I whispered into the silence, "What kind of son forgets the mother who raised him?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. The rain tapped against the windows like 1,000 tiny knuckles, asking to be let in. But I didn't move. I just sat there, wrapped in the quilt, my heart heavy with grief and disbelief. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning, that karma had its own way of answering questions in its own time. And so, the next morning, the storm had passed, but inside my heart the clouds lingered. I woke up to the faint chirping of sparrows outside the window, their little voices carrying on as if nothing in the world had changed. But everything had changed. For me, nothing would ever be the same again. I sat on the edge of my bed, my feet brushing against the cool wooden floorboards. My slippers lay nearby, but I didn't slip them on. I just stared at them as if they too were waiting for me to rise and carry on with life. But I couldn't. Not yet. The pillow beside me was still indented, a reminder of nights I once shared with my late husband, Charles. He had been gone for over 20 years, but on mornings like this, I could almost feel his hand reaching for mine. If only he had been here, I thought. Maybe our son wouldn't have drifted so far away. I shuffled to the kitchen, the faint scent of yesterday's apple pie still clinging to the air. It was cold now, the crust hardened, the filling congealed. A pie made for love, rejected by greed. I made myself a cup of coffee, the old percolator hissing and sputtering as it always had. Its sound was familiar, almost comforting. I poured the steaming liquid into my favorite chipped mug, the one with faded daisies painted along the rim. But when I sat down at the table, the chair across from me felt like an accusation. Empty, waiting. That was his seat. Always had been, from the mornings when he'd swing his little legs and spill cereal milk on the floor, to the evenings when he'd sit with homework spread wide, sighing at his math problems while I tried to help. Now it sat empty, silent, as if mocking me. He must have been around 10 years old, his eyes bright, cheeks smudged with dirt from playing outside. He came running in, waving a dollar bill he'd earned by mowing old Mrs. Carter's lawn. "Mum," he had shouted, breathless with excitement, "I'm rich." I laughed then, scooping him into my arms, his sweaty little head pressing against my cheek. "Rich? With $1, I teased. But he looked up at me, serious as could be. "It's not just $1, Mum. It's the start of something. One day, I'll make so much money that we'll never have to worry again." I remember kissing his forehead and saying, "Just promise me, son, you'll never let money matter more than love." He had nodded quickly, distracted by his dollar, and ran off to hide it in his piggy bank. If only promises made in childhood lasted forever. Later that week, I went into town to buy groceries. The little shop on Main Street was quiet that morning, the smell of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. As I picked up a loaf, I overheard two women whispering by the fruit stand. Their voices were low, but in a small town, whispers carried louder than shouts. "They say her son is too busy for her now," one said. "Too busy counting money to care for his own mother," the other replied. My cheeks burned, and I lowered my head, pretending to examine the apples. They weren't cruel women, they were just speaking the truth, and sometimes the truth cut sharper than any knife. I left the store quickly, clutching my groceries tight, my heart heavier than the bags I carried. That evening, the phone rang. For a moment, my heart leapt, hoping it was him, calling to apologize, to say he didn't mean the harsh words. I rushed to answer, my voice trembling. Hello? But it wasn't him. It was a telemarketer trying to sell me a new insurance plan. I hung up gently, the disappointment washing over me like a tide pulling me under. I stared at the phone, willing it to ring again, but it stayed silent. The silence became a second storm, one I couldn't escape. Nights were the hardest. I would sit by the window, the quilt wrapped around me, watching the headlights of passing cars. Each one that slowed made me hope it was him, pulling into the driveway, ready to come back home. But the cars never stopped, they just sped by, leaving me in the shadows. I thought of the lullabies I used to sing to him, how his little hands would grip mine tightly as I rocked him to sleep, how he'd whisper, "Don't let go, Mama." And now, he was the one who had let go. One night, unable to sleep, I opened the drawer of my bedside table. Inside was a letter, folded neatly. It was one I had written years ago, after his father passed. I had poured my heart into it, telling him to never forget his roots, to cherish family, to hold love above all else. I had meant to give it to him on his wedding day, but that day never came. He never settled down, never brought home someone to love. He said relationships slowed him down, got in the way of success. So the letter stayed in the drawer, waiting for a day that never arrived. As I read it again, my tears blurred the ink, smudging the words I had once written so clearly. Lying in bed that night, the quilt pulled tight under my chin, I whispered into the dark, "Money can build walls, but it cannot build a home." I didn't know then that the walls my son was building for himself would one day become his prison. Karma has a way of finding its way into locked rooms and guarded hearts, and for my son, it was only a matter of time. The weeks after that stormy night dragged on slowly, like a heavy wagon stuck in the mud. Each day felt the same. Lonely breakfasts, quiet afternoons, and nights where the silence pressed against me so hard I thought I might suffocate under it. And still the phone didn't ring. I tried to stay strong. I told myself maybe he just needed time. Maybe once his anger cooled, he'd walk through that door again, smiling, ready to say he was sorry. But days turned into weeks, and weeks stretched into months. Hope can only hold you up for so long before it starts to crumble. One afternoon, I walked to the post office in town. The sun was out, bright and mocking, warming everyone but me. As I stepped inside, I spotted Mrs. Carter, the same neighbor whose lawn my son had mowed for $1 so many years ago. Her hair was thinner now, her step slower, but her smile was kind. "Oh, I heard about your son," she said softly, almost as if she were delivering bad news at a funeral. "He's doing so well, isn't he? Big business in the city, making a name for himself." I forced a smile. "Yes, he's doing well." But inside, my chest tightened. Doing well? Perhaps in dollars, perhaps in status, but what about in love, in loyalty, in family? No one asked about that. No one cared that success had built a wall between us. A few weeks later, the truth came to me not from his lips, but from the crumpled pages of the local paper. There he was, his face plastered across the business section, a headline in bold, "Young entrepreneur builds real estate empire in record time." I held the paper in trembling hands, staring at the photograph of the boy I once held in my arms, now dressed in an expensive suit, grinning like he owned the world. His smile looked confident, yes, but to me, it also looked hollow. I traced his face on the page with my fingertip, whispering, "Do you even remember me, son? Or have I become a shadow you've chosen to forget?" That summer, I heard he was back in town for a weekend. Word spreads fast in small places. I prepared the house, swept the porch, baked fresh bread, even laid out the quilt on the rocking chair as if it were waiting for him. My heart raced at the thought of him walking through the door again, just like old times. But the weekend came and went, and he never showed. Later, someone told me he had stayed at the fanciest hotel on the outskirts of town, too busy for his mother's kitchen, too important for his childhood home. That rejection cut deeper than any argument, and I remembered something his father once told him when he was just a teenager. "Son," Charles had said, resting a firm hand on his shoulder, "a man who puts money before family will one day find himself rich in gold but poor in love." Our boy had nodded politely, but his eyes were already elsewhere, on the shiny cars, the big houses, the glitter of a life beyond our small town. And now, years later, his father's warning echoed like thunder in my ears. As time passed, little whispers began to reach me. Nothing concrete at first, just murmurs. "Your son's company is growing too fast," someone mentioned at church. "He's borrowing more than he should," another added. I tried not to listen. I tried to believe he knew what he was doing. He was smart, ambitious. He always had been. But ambition is a fire, and when it burns too hot, it consumes everything in its path, even family, even love. When my birthday came that year, I told myself not to expect anything, and yet I still hoped. I baked myself a small cake, just a single layer with vanilla frosting. I placed one candle on top, lit it, and whispered a wish into the quiet. My wish was simple, just a phone call, just to hear his voice again. But the candle burned down, the wax pooling on the plate, and the phone never rang. I sat there in the dim kitchen, the silence swallowing me whole, and I thought, how strange that a mother can give her entire life to a child, and yet on her birthday she sits alone. It wasn't until autumn that the first real sign appeared. I was in town again, at the bakery, when I overheard two businessmen chatting over coffee. They didn't notice me listening, an old woman blending into the background. "His company's overextended," one said, shaking his head. "Mark my words," the other replied. "It's only a matter of time before it comes crashing down." My heart skipped. They were talking about him, my son. I walked home slowly that day, my groceries heavy in my arms, but my thoughts heavier still. Could it be true? Could the empire he had built on greed and ambition be nothing more than sand, ready to collapse with the first strong wind? That night, I lay awake in bed, listening to the wind rustling the trees outside my window. For the first time in years, I didn't just feel sorrow. I felt something else creeping in, something unfamiliar, something I didn't want to admit. It was the faint stirrings of justice, the whisper of karma approaching, step by step, ready to knock on his door just as harshly as he had slammed mine. And I was torn, because though he had hurt me more than anyone else ever could, he was still my son, and the thought of watching him fall, of watching him suffer, was almost too much to bear, almost. But karma does not ask a mother's permission, it simply comes. The signs were subtle at first, like hairline cracks in a porcelain vase. Small enough to ignore, but impossible to stop once they began to spread. I heard about them not from him, of course, but from others. A whisper here, a rumor there, and each time my heart ached with a strange mixture of fear and something darker. Justice, perhaps, or the ghost of it. One evening, I overheard a conversation at the general store. Two men leaned close, their voices low but urgent. "They say his partner's been pocketing money," one said, shaking his head. "Not surprised," the other replied. "You climb too fast. You don't notice the snakes slithering beside you." Snakes. The word sent a shiver down my spine, because I remembered the day my boy, barely 10, came running to me with a garter snake coiled around his wrist, laughing as though he'd tamed a dragon. I had scolded him then, warning him that not all creatures that smile can be trusted. And now, here he was, all grown, with snakes wearing suits instead of scales. Months later, I found myself walking past the old Miller estate on the edge of town. It was a grand place, white columns, sprawling lawns, the kind of house people whispered about when they dreamed of winning the lottery, and parked in front of it was his car. My chest tightened. I hadn't seen it in years, but I knew it at once. The gleaming black, polished so bright it caught the sun like a mirror. He wasn't inside the house. I didn't see him at all, but I heard from someone later that he had bought it. "Your son's moving up in the world," they said proudly. "A mansion now. Can you believe it?" I nodded politely, but inside, I wondered if a house so large could ever feel like a home when it was built on emptiness. And I knew, even if I stood at its doorstep, he would not open the door to me. The storm came the following spring. It began with whispers in the papers. Lawsuit filed against rising real estate magnate. Questionable deals raise eyebrows. At first, I tried to push it away. After all, rumors are cheap. But then the headlines grew louder, bolder. Empire at risk. Is success built on sand? The town buzzed with talk. Neighbors who once praised him now shook their heads. Some said he had cheated. Others said he had trusted the wrong people. And me, I sat in my rocking chair by the fire, clutching those newspapers, my hands trembling. He was my boy, my flesh and blood, and yet he was also a stranger now. The phone call that never came. Through all of this, the lawsuits, the gossip, the cracks widening in his empire, he never called me. Not once. I waited. Every evening, I sat by the phone staring at it as if I could will it to ring. I imagined his voice. "Mama, I'm in trouble. Mama, I need you." And I knew, if he had asked, I would have opened my arms. I would have given everything, forgiven everything, because that is what mothers do. But the phone stayed silent, and I realized his pride was greater than his pain. I remembered a time when he was just a boy, maybe 12. He had built a small wooden cart with his father, hammering the nails with all the determination in the world. But one wheel wobbled badly, and when the cart tipped over, spilling his hard work into the dirt, he refused to admit it was broken. "No," he had said firmly, jaw set, eyes blazing. "It's fine. It's not broken." And he dragged that cart down the road, the wheel squealing and shaking, until finally it collapsed entirely. His father had crouched down, looked him in the eye and said softly, "Pride will break what honesty could fix." I think of those words often now, because just like that cart, his empire was beginning to shake, and his pride, oh, his pride would not let him fix it. It wasn't long before the news spread. His mansion was up for auction. I didn't go, of course, but I heard about it from neighbors, their voices filled with a mix of pity and cruel satisfaction. "They say he lost everything," one whispered. "Serves him right," another replied. "Shouldn't have flown so high." I walked home in silence, each step heavy. I wanted to weep for him, to cry out at the unfairness of it all. But deep down I also felt something colder, sharper, like the edge of a blade, calmer. It had come just as surely as the seasons change, just as surely as the tides rise and fall. Weeks later I finally saw him. It was by accident. I was at the grocery store, reaching for a sack of flour when I turned, and there he was. He looked the same, and yet not the same. His suit was still sharp, his shoes polished, but his eyes, oh, his eyes! They were empty, hollow, like windows to a house already abandoned. Our eyes met for the briefest second. My heart leapt, ready to run to him, to wrap him in my arms. But he turned, just like that. He turned and walked away, his shoulders stiff, his pace quick. My son, my boy, walking away as though I were a stranger in the aisle. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moon climb high above the trees. I thought of him, alone in some hotel room or borrowed apartment, walls closing in, the empire he had built crumbling piece by piece. And though my heart ached, though tears burned my eyes, I whispered into the stillness, "Perhaps this is the only way you'll learn, son. Perhaps you must lose everything before you remember what truly matters." The night answered with silence, and I knew the fall was not over. Not yet. The walls had only just begun to crumble. It was the spring of 2008 when the first cracks began to show. I remember it well, because while the world was distracted by news of markets crashing and jobs disappearing, I was watching my son's carefully crafted empire wobble like a house of cards in a storm. His company, the one he had poured every ounce of his energy into, had grown quickly, too quickly. He was never one to be patient, you see. When he wanted something, he wanted it fast and bigger than anyone else. At first he was praised as a rising star. Magazines wrote about him. Neighbors whispered his name with envy. But beneath the glossy cover stories and smiling photographs was a man running on arrogance and borrowed time. I heard the first whispers in town before he told me anything himself. That's how it usually went. A woman I knew from church leaned close to me one Sunday and said, "Did you hear? There's talk your son's company is in trouble." My heart sank, though my pride forced a smile onto my lips. "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing," I told her. But inside, I knew better. The calls started coming at night. "Mum, can I talk to you for a second?" he would say, his voice thinner than I had ever heard it. And I would sit there, clutching the receiver, listening as he tried to mask his fear with bravado. "They don't understand vision, Mum. These investors, they're blind, short-sighted. They can't see what I'm building." But even through the static, even through his carefully chosen words, I could hear the tremble. By June, the cracks had split wide open. Partners he had trusted turned their backs on him. His so-called friends stopped answering his calls. The same men who had once toasted champagne at his table now whispered about his downfall in hushed tones, glad to see the giant stumble. I remember one night vividly. It was late, close to midnight, when the phone rang again. "Mum?" His voice was so small, so unlike the son who had once slammed a door in my face. "I think I've lost everything." There was silence between us, the kind that stretches across miles, heavy with words unspoken. I wanted to say, "I told you money could not be trusted. I told you love was worth more than gold." But instead I whispered, "I'm here." The weeks that followed were brutal. The newspapers ran stories about failed deals and court cases. Television anchors shook their heads as they spoke his name. Each headline was like a dagger to my heart. To see my son's life reduced to scandal and ridicule, I wouldn't wish it on any mother. He lost his home first, the grand mansion he had bought with such pride, filled with marble floors and glittering chandeliers, repossessed. I still remember the photograph I saw online, movers carrying boxes out of those tall doors, his name printed in bold letters beneath the image. Then came the cars, the watches, the clothes. One by one, all the trappings of success were stripped away, until he was left with nothing but his shame. And still, not once did he knock on my door. I would walk into town for groceries and feel the stares of neighbors. Some pitied me, others smirked as though his downfall was somehow my fault. "Poor thing," one woman whispered as I passed. "Raised a son like that, only to watch him fall." Each comment was another stone I carried in my chest. But do you know what hurt the most? It wasn't the gossip, it wasn't the shame. It was the memory of his little boy laughter, the way he used to run into my arms after school. I would close my eyes at night and see that boy again, only to wake up and remember the man he had become. Then one evening the doorbell rang. I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding. Could it be? After all these years, had he finally come home? When I opened the door, it wasn't him. It was a messenger with a letter. My son had written me, not with love, not with apology, but with desperation. "Mum," the letter read, "I need money, just a little, just until things settle. I know you have savings. Please don't turn your back on me now." I sat down at the kitchen table, that letter trembling in my hands. My eyes blurred with tears as I read the words over and over. Not once did he ask how I was. Not once did he say he missed me, or that he regretted leaving me behind. All he wanted was money, the very thing that had led him astray. That night I wept. I wept for the boy I had raised, for the man he had become, for the cruel hand of karma that had finally caught him, and I wept because even in his ruin, he could not see me as anything more than a bank. Still, something deep inside me ached with compassion. I thought of the cold nights he must be facing, the loneliness pressing in around him. I imagined him staring at empty walls where paintings once hung, hearing the echo of footsteps in a house that was no longer his. I longed to hold him, to tell him that he was still my son, no matter what he had done, but another part of me, the part that had been broken so many times, knew I had to be careful, so I folded the letter, placed it back in its envelope and whispered into the stillness of my kitchen, "Lord, show me what to do." The answer did not come quickly. For days I wrestled with it. I walked through the garden pulling weeds with trembling hands, praying for wisdom. Should I help him? Should I let him face the consequences of his choices? Every night I sat at my window staring at the moon, hoping the quiet would speak. And slowly clarity began to form. Karma was not cruelty, it was justice. It was the natural result of his choices. And if I stepped in now, if I gave him money to cushion the fall, I would only delay the lesson he so desperately needed to learn. The next time he called, I answered. His voice was hollow, stripped of its former pride. "Mum, did you get my letter?" "Yes," I said softly. "And?" His words hung in the air, heavy with expectation. I took a breath, steadying my heart. "No," I said. "I will not send money, not this time." There was silence on the other end of the line, so long I wondered if he had hung up. Then came a sound I had never heard from him before, not anger, not arrogance, but a sob. "Mum, I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. This was the moment I had prayed for, the moment when the walls of pride finally crumbled, when the son who had chosen money over me began to see that it could not save him. I whispered into the phone, "Then maybe it's time to come home." And for the first time in years, he didn't argue. The morning he came back was cold and grey. The kind of morning where the sky hangs heavy and the air smells faintly of rain. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing a chipped teacup, when I heard the sound of tires crunching against the gravel driveway. For a moment I thought it was a delivery truck or maybe a neighbor stopping by. But then I saw him, my son. He stepped out of a car that wasn't his, a borrowed sedan, plain and unremarkable. Gone were the tailored suits and polished shoes. He wore jeans that sagged at the knees, a wrinkled shirt and sneakers so worn I barely recognized him. And in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Not arrogance, not calculation, but weariness. I opened the door slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. For years I had dreamed of this moment. I had imagined him running into my arms, weeping apologies, promising to never leave me again. But that wasn't what happened. He stood there on the porch, shoulders slumped, eyes darting away from mine. His hands fumbled in his pockets as if searching for words that refused to come. Finally he said, "Hi, Mum." 2 little words, fragile, almost broken, and in that instant, every wall I had built around my heart cracked. I stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in." He walked past me into the living room, and I swear the air itself shifted. This was the same room where he had once stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Now he entered like a ghost, carrying with him the scent of rain and regret. He sat on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the floorboards. I wanted to reach out, to brush his hair back like I used to tell him that no matter what, he was still my boy. But the words stuck in my throat. So instead, I asked quietly, "Are you hungry?" He gave a small nod. I moved to the kitchen, my hands trembling as I pulled out a pan, cracked eggs, sliced bread. The sizzle of butter in the skillet filled the silence between us, a sound far louder than it should have been. As I cooked, my mind wandered back to simpler days, mornings when he was small, running into the kitchen with bedhead and sleepy eyes, asking for pancakes with extra syrup. Now he sat in silence at the table, shoulders heavy, as if the weight of the world had finally crushed him. I set the plate before him. He murmured, "Thanks," barely above a whisper. And then, for the first time in years, I watched my son eat a meal I had prepared. At night, he stayed in the guest room. I could hear him moving restlessly, pacing the floorboards, muttering under his breath. Sometimes, through the thin walls, I caught the sound of muffled sobs. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, torn apart inside. Part of me wanted to rush in, hold him, tell him everything would be all right. But another part remembered all the times he had chosen money over me. All the nights I had cried alone, waiting for a call that never came. So I stayed in my room, whispering prayers into the darkness. The days blurred into weeks. We fell into a rhythm of quiet routines. I would brew coffee in the mornings, leave a cup by his door. He would sit at the kitchen table with the newspaper, though I doubt he read a single word. At dinner, we ate in near silence, the clink of forks against plates louder than any conversation. Sometimes he would look at me, as if he wanted to speak. His lips would part, then press shut again. It was as though the words of apology were trapped inside him, fighting against the remnants of pride. One evening, I found him standing in front of the fireplace, staring at the old photographs on the mantelpiece. There was one of him as a boy, grinning with 2 missing front teeth, holding up a fish he had caught at the lake. His eyes lingered there for a long time. Finally, he spoke, his voice hoarse. "I used to think I was better than all this." I stayed quiet, letting him speak. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "I thought if I got out, if I made enough money, I'd never have to look back. I thought I didn't need anyone, not even you." My hands trembled at my sides, hearing him admit it cut deeper than any insult ever could. "And now?" I asked softly. He turned, his eyes glistening. "Now I don't even know who I am." That night, after he went to bed, I sat in the living room alone, staring into the glow of the fireplace. My heart ached with both sorrow and hope. He was here. He had returned. But the wounds between us were not healed. They were raw, jagged, waiting for time and truth to do their work. I whispered into the stillness, "Lord, give me strength. Help me love him, even when it hurts." The following week, something shifted. I was out in the garden, pulling weeds near the rose bushes, when I heard footsteps behind me. Turning, I saw him standing there, hands shoved in his pockets, watching me quietly. "Need help?" he asked. It was the simplest question, yet it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken apologies. Together, we worked side by side, pulling weeds, planting seeds. For hours, neither of us said much, but in that silence, something was mending, a fragile thread weaving itself back between us. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. At dinner that night, I caught him watching me across the table. His eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen in years, and for the first time since his return, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he was learning. But deep in my heart, I also knew this journey was far from over, because karma is not a single moment. It is a slow, unrelenting teacher, and my son still had many lessons left to learn. The first signs of spring came early that year. The snow melted into the soil, the trees began to bud, and little shoots of green pushed through the garden I had tended with weary hands. Life, it seemed, was returning, and with it came the stirrings of change in my son. He had been living under my roof for nearly 3 months now. The silence between us had grown softer, less jagged. Some mornings I'd find him brewing coffee before I even came downstairs. Other evenings he'd wash the dishes without being asked. Small things, but they carried the weight of mountains. One morning he even laughed. Just a small laugh at something the old cat did when it tried to climb onto the table. But hearing that sound again, his laughter, it nearly undid me. Still, I knew healing wasn't a straight line. The first crack appeared one Thursday evening. We were sitting at the dinner table. I had made pot roast, slow cooked the way he liked as a boy. He ate quietly, pushing the carrots around his plate. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Mum, I got a call today." I froze. From who? He cleared his throat. "An old colleague. They're starting something new. Said they could use me. Big money in it." My stomach tightened. I set down my fork and looked at him across the table. "And what did you say?" He shrugged, eyes avoiding mine. "I told them I'd think about it." The room went quiet. Only the ticking clock on the wall filled the space between us. Finally, I whispered, "Son, haven't you learned? Money is what pulled you away from everything that mattered. It chewed you up and spat you out." His jaw tightened. "I'm not stupid, Mum. I won't make the same mistakes. But I can't just sit here forever, living off your cooking, wasting away in this little town. I need to prove I can stand again." His words stung. This little town, my cooking, the life I had cherished. To him it still seemed so small. "Standing again doesn't mean running back into the same fire that burned you," I said softly. But he only pushed back from the table, his chair scraping the floor. "You don't understand. You've never understood." And with that he stormed out the back door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My chest ached with fear. Had he truly changed? Or was he just biding his time until the next opportunity pulled him away again? I whispered into the darkness, "Lord, don't let me lose him twice." The house felt colder, emptier. The next morning he returned. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair disheveled. He sat at the kitchen table, silent, while I poured coffee into his cup. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "I'm sorry." I glanced at him. "For what?" "For last night, for yelling, for everything." His hands shook as he gripped the mug. "I just don't know who I am without money, without success. That's all I've ever been." My heart broke all over again. I reached across the table, placing my hand gently over his. "You are my son. That's enough." He swallowed hard, his shoulders trembling. But deep inside, I wondered if those words would be enough to anchor him. The weeks stretched on. He began to take small jobs around town, helping a neighbor fix a fence, assisting at the local hardware store. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't lucrative, but I could see the difference in him. He came home with dirt on his hands and sweat on his brow, yet there was a quiet pride in his eyes. One evening, as we ate dinner, he said, "It feels good to work with my hands, to do something real." I smiled, though a part of me held back. I had seen hope before. I had seen him take steps forward, only to sprint backward into greed's waiting arms. Then came the letter. It arrived in a crisp white envelope, tucked into our mailbox. His name scrawled across the front. He opened it at the table, and I watched the color drain from his face. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the page, lips pressed tight. Finally, he whispered, "An offer, a big one. They want me to consult on a deal. It could bring in more money than I've seen in years." My breath caught in my throat. "And what do you plan to do?" He set the letter down, his hands trembling. "I don't know." That night, the house was heavy with silence. I could hear him pacing in his room, back and forth, like a man caught between two worlds. I sat by the fireplace, the flames flickering, shadows dancing on the walls, and I prayed, harder than I had prayed in years. "Please, Lord, don't let him fall again. Give him the strength to see what truly matters." The next morning, I found him sitting on the porch, the letter crumpled in his hand. His eyes were red, his face drawn. "Mum," he said softly, "I burned it." "Burned what?" "The letter, the offer. I threw it in the fire last night." Tears filled my eyes. For the first time, I saw not just regret in his gaze, but resolve. "I'm tired of chasing ghosts," he said. "I want something real. I want to be better." My heart swelled, though I knew the journey wasn't over. Karma had stripped him down, broken him, and now it was teaching him to rebuild, slowly, Painfully, truthfully, I reached out, cupping his cheek the way I had when he was a boy. Then start here, start now, one day at a time. He leaned into my hand, eyes closing, and for the first time, I felt that maybe, just maybe, the man sitting before me was not the same one who had once chosen money over love, but in the shadows of my heart, I knew there was still one more test waiting for him, because forgiveness may come slowly, but redemption, that would take even longer. The summer sun hung low in the sky, spilling golden light across the porch. The air was warm, carrying with it the scent of lilacs blooming by the garden fence. It should have been a peaceful evening, and in many ways it was. But deep in my heart, I knew karma hadn't yet finished its work. It came one Saturday afternoon. My son had been helping the local pastor repair the old church roof. I had watched from the kitchen window as he carried heavy beams, sweat soaking through his shirt, determination carved into his face. There was a steadiness in him now, a man humbled, a man rebuilding. But when he came inside that evening, his face was pale. He sat at the table, his hands trembling. "Mum." His voice cracked. "She called me." I set down the dish towel. "Who called you?" "Rebecca." The woman who had once stood by him when the money flowed, and who abandoned him the moment it dried up. "She wants to see me," he whispered. "She says she misses me. She wants to talk." For a long moment, I said nothing. The clock ticked on the wall. Outside, a cicada buzzed in the trees. My heart tightened. "And what do you want?" I finally asked. His eyes darted to the floor. "I don't know. A part of me wants to believe her, wants to believe she's changed. That maybe I could get back the life I lost." I felt my chest tighten, the ache of 1,000 wounds reopening. "Son," I whispered, my voice trembling, "listen carefully. This is karma's last test. Not mine, not even yours, but the universe's way of asking, have you truly learned? Or are you still chasing illusions?" He didn't answer. He stood abruptly, pacing the room, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. Finally, he stopped by the window, staring out into the twilight. "I have to see her," he said. I turned away, hiding the tears welling in my eyes. I knew this was a path he had to choose on his own. The next evening, he left. He wore his best shirt, combed his hair, tried to mask the trembling in his hands. I watched him walk down the driveway, his figure fading into the orange glow of sunset. And then, silence. Hours of silence. I prayed harder than I ever had before. Lord, if he must be broken again, let it be the breaking that finally heals him. It was near midnight when I heard the door open. He stepped inside, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. He dropped into the chair across from me, burying his face in his hands. "She doesn't love me," he whispered. "She never did. She just wanted to know if I had money again. When I told her I didn't, she laughed. She laughed, Mum, said I was nothing, said I wasn't worth the dirt on her shoes." His voice cracked, and for the first time in years I saw him cry, really cry, the tears of a man stripped bare. I rose slowly, moved around the table, and pulled him into my arms. His body shook against mine, like the little boy he once was, clinging to me after scraping his knee. "It's all right," I whispered into his hair. "Let her laughter be the chains that break. You are free now. Do you hear me? Free." In that moment, I understood. Karma hadn't come to destroy my son. It had come to reveal the truth, to tear away the illusions, the false loves, the hollow dreams, until all that remained was something real. And sitting there, with his head against my shoulder, I realized he had finally chosen. Not money, not success, not false love. He chose me. He chose home. He chose redemption. The weeks that followed were different. He no longer spoke of big deals or old colleagues. Instead, He poured himself into this town, into work that mattered, into people who needed him. The neighbors began to speak of him with admiration. The children waved at him when he passed by. Even the pastor one Sunday put a hand on his shoulder and said, "This man has learned what it means to rebuild." And for me, each day felt like a gift I thought I had lost forever. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, he sat beside me on the porch. His voice was quiet, steady. "Mum, thank you." "For what, son?" "For never giving up on me, for loving me when I didn't deserve it, for saving me." Tears stung my eyes. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "No," I whispered. "It wasn't me. It was karma. It was life teaching you. I was just the place you could come home to." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Then I guess I'm finally home." And there, under the fading light of day, I knew the story had come full circle. My son had chosen money over me once, but in the end, karma made sure he understood the price. And though the road had been long, cruel, and heavy with sorrow, he was here now. Not perfect, not unscarred, but real, redeemed. And that is all a mother could ever pray for.